Hello, I'm Keith, and today I want to talk to you about why myself and some of my friends, my co-plaintiffs, would like to sue the Democratic Party of Oregon, and why we'd like your help. Before I get to the lawsuit specifically, I want to talk about some things that the Democratic Party of Oregon has done that sort of help set the stage for its corruption and ultimately help build the case for the lawsuit, but just in a sort of giving it context kind of way. I'd like to get some things out of the way. First of all, I am a registered Democrat in the state of Oregon. I have been for many years now. Whatever I'm about to say about the Democratic Party of Oregon, I don't mean that to be an endorsement of the Republican Party. They're probably worse in most ways, but as a Democrat and as an activist within the Democratic Party, that's what I know, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. As an introduction, as a primer, before I even get into the scandals that I'm going to talk about and the journalism that I'm going to try to collect here and offer to you, I'm just going to show you small clips from John Oliver's Last Week Tonight, where he talks about Oregon.
Wait. Okay, so let's break all of that down. Oregon spent $250 million, and its website, designed to sign people up in one sitting, did that for exactly nobody. And they're now handing the keys over to healthcare.gov. That has got to be a bitter pill to swallow for the people of Oregon, or it would be if they could get the pill, which they can't because their shitty website is broken. And at the very same time they're supposedly addressing problem gambling, states are actively expanding into even more addictive products. Just look at Oregon.
The lottery takes in makes about $1 billion every 2 years for the state. About 80% of it, maybe even more, 86, 90%.
Yeah, that's what we're running right there on the screen. Boy.
Comes from one source, and that's these video machines, mostly video slot machines or video poker.
The vast majority of Oregon's lottery income comes from video slots and video poker, meaning that Oregon claims this is a lottery machine. Because of course it is. Just like this is a lottery wheel, and this is a lottery table. And of course we all remember Martin Scorsese's movie, Lottery. But here is where it gets frightening, because while the Oregonian rebuilt its state house team, other papers have been forced to simply go without. A study of over 200 papers found that between 2003 and 2014, their number of full-time state house reporters declined by 35%. And that's not good. Just listen to David Simon, who before creating the TV show The Wire, worked for years at the Baltimore Sun.
There's no glory in that kind of journalism, but that is the bedrock of what keeps, the next 10 or 15 years in this country are going to be a halcyon era for state and local political corruption. It is going to be one of the great times to be a corrupt politician. I really envy them. I really do.
To convince you of my case in this lawsuit, I need to convince you that the Democratic Party of Oregon would not only break the law, but they would think they could get away with it for a long period of time. And in order to explain that, it's pretty easy to point to how Oregon is seen from the outside.
Look, we get it, Oregon. You people live in a cartoon. Your mountains are breathtaking, your coffee is fair trade, and everywhere you go you hear the sound of fucking ukuleles.
Though Oregon's politics are often seen by outsiders as even cartoonishly liberal, they are more often better described as neoliberal. Oregon's state politics have been controlled by just one party for more than 12 years now, and without competition this party has been able to get away with a lot with very little accountability. And this lawsuit ultimately is about accountability. It's about accountability to us, the people, the voters, and that's really what democracy is ultimately about. In this video, I'm going to cover the biggest three, as I see it, scandals to happen with the Democratic Party of Oregon in the last 5 years. I am not going to talk about the Cover Oregon scandal. I'm not going to talk about the cuts to PERS, that's the Public Employee Retirement System. And I'm not going to talk about the Jordan Cove pipeline, just because we don't have time to get into everything. Today I'm going to talk about three scandals. I'm going to talk about the scandal that caused Governor Kitzhaber to resign in 2015. I'm going to talk about the sexual harassment scandal that played out over 2018, 2019. And I'm going to talk about the public records scandal, which really blew up in 2019. And if I'm really trying to explain why Democrats here in Oregon could think that they would get away with so much corruption, so much blatant unethical, and sometimes even illegal behavior, I can't think of the words better than what David Simon said at that meeting.
The next 10 or 15 years in this country are going to be a halcyon era for state and local political corruption. It is going to be one of the great times to be a corrupt politician.
So in 2014, Democratic incumbent Governor John Kitzhaber was running for an unprecedented fourth term. A scandal came out during the campaign, largely brought up by his Republican opponent in the general election, about his corruption. His fiancée was getting lucrative contracts from the state, and it looked pretty shady. Some of these contracts were for rather large sums of money. This scandal was talked about, and it was brought up during the campaign, and even with the general election going on and a lot of evidence supporting this scandal, John Kitzhaber was elected to a fourth term in 2014. So my speculation is that a lot of people in Oregon, a lot of Democratic voters, didn't really believe what his Republican opponent was saying about the corruption, just thought it was kind of partisan campaign rhetoric, and it wasn't really going to go anywhere, and didn't really mean anything. But contrary to that belief, the Republican opponent in 2014 did pursue the corruption and filed for an investigation with the Federal Department of Justice. And eventually they had enough evidence that the Department of Justice did open up that investigation. And in January 2015, the governor was sworn in, and about a month later, in February 2015, the governor resigned at the beginning of their fourth term.
Out of the state of Oregon, we've just received word that the governor there has resigned. The Democratic four-term governor had faced mounting calls to resign over the scandal concerning his fiance's consulting and policy work.
It's probably worth mentioning that John Kitzhaber, while he was still governor, tried to cover it up, ordered certain records to be destroyed. That attempted cover-up is what actually triggered the scandal to blow up to its second or third level, when the person who was ordered to destroy the records, one of the people in charge of that department, refused and instead turned over the evidence of the request of the destruction of records to the press, and that is really what triggered our governor resigning in 2015 and the Secretary of State taking their place. This scandal is a little more complicated because the crime of sexual harassment in this case is one of having a hostile work environment, and it's hard to trace exactly when that started. So one way to look at this is to say it starts in 1997 when state representative, who would later become state senator, Jeff Cruz, was elected and started serving in the Oregon state legislature, because he was the person that a lot of these allegations were ultimately leveled against, although when it comes down to it, he wasn't the only person. You could trace it to when two female employees made complaints in 2015, or in 2016 when two female state senators made complaints about sexual harassment. But really, most of the public learned about this in late 2017 when those two state senators made formal complaints, this time in writing, and also came out to the public after about a year of inaction on those initial verbal complaints that they made. So this scandal really starts in 2017 as far as the public knows, but it could go back at least a decade prior. Where it picks up a lot of steam is that in March of 2018, now after the public learning about the sexual harassment, Senator Jeff Cruz resigns, although that wasn't really justice because it didn't really hold accountable anyone who allowed the hostile work environment to go on for so long. And after Jeff Cruz resigned, it was really considered by the Democratic Party at large, especially Democrats in Salem, this was all over now, and that, justice had been served in some way, shape, or form, which it obviously hadn't. So in August 2018, a few months after Jeff Cruz resigns, something happened that really surprised everybody, and that is our labor commissioner, which is an independent, elected, nonpartisan office statewide. Our labor commissioner, Brad Avakian, filed a complaint on behalf of two of the victims of sexual harassment. August 2018, as you can also imagine, is right before November 2018, and our gubernatorial elections, our governor is elected in November 2018. It's probably worth mentioning at this point that the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate are the two highest elected officials in the legislature in the Oregon Capitol, and they serve on what's called the Administrative Committee. They're actually the chairs of the Administration Committee, and the Administration Committee is in charge of all the Capitol employees. Because both of those positions are controlled by Democrats, that means that who this mostly falls on for having a hostile work environment and for employees of the Capitol who are alleged to have committed and covered up a lot of this sexual harassment, they are most responsible to the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House. So in February 2019, this scandal kind of went and escalated to a new level when legislature's leadership from the House and the Senate put on a training, and at this training, the people who were conducting it basically discouraged staff to bring forward allegations of sexual harassment. The phrase that was used in the training And this is according to one legislator's staffer's eyewitness testimony. And I'm not joking about this, I'm not making this up. The trainer said, "Snitches get stitches." So it gives you a kind of idea about what they were saying about sexual harassment in the Capitol. And this is obviously after a lot of pressure has been put on legislative leaders to do something about the hostile work environment beyond just having this one senator resign. Their response was not to fix the hostile work environment, but instead to try to get people to stop talking about the hostile work environment. The legislative staffers signed a letter complaining about this, went to the media. Their senators that employed them said that they wouldn't be going to any more trainings because of what was said at these trainings. It was kind of a big deal.
In this investigation by the Bureau, documents show that after Gelser came forward, other senators retaliated. The documents include examples, including Senate President Courtney, quote, yelling at her when she pointed out it was his job to enforce policy. The new investigation supports Gelser's claims as well as claims from other employees.
Annie Montgomery, she was an intern for Senator Jeff Cruz back in 2017. Montgomery says he harassed her almost every single day. She and another young woman who interned for Cruz sued him and also other legislative leaders who allegedly knew about the harassment but did nothing about it.
Less than a month later, the legislature reached a settlement with 8 of the victims for more than $1 million total. And even though there were more than 15 alleged victims, 8 of them got paid, and that was the settlement. So there was some level of accountability, even though it wasn't perfect, and even though both the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House are still in power and still in their same positions, they at least had to pay some money to the victims, and there was some small amount of justice. The next scandal that we're going to talk about is the public records scandal. So far, all of these 3 scandals have been listed chronologically, but they have some amount of overlap, and that's true with this public records scandal as well. This scandal really begins with the resignation of Governor Kitzhaber in 2015. You see, in the months leading up to that resignation, he had blocked public records requests related to his fiance's consulting. It wasn't just Kitzhaber's Republican opponent that was responsible for pushing the scandal to the point where the DOJ decided to open an investigation. It couldn't have happened without the media's constant reporting, vetting, digging for facts, putting in requests for records, and so forth. Because Oregon doesn't have a lieutenant governor position, when the governor resigns, the Secretary of State assumes the office of governor. When that happened in 2015, our Secretary of State, now Governor Brown, made an inaugural speech where she talked about a lot of things, and some of them very important to this scandal. She said that the public was right to be distrustful and skeptical of the current government of our state. She said she had planned to restore that trust. She said that she would be transparent, and she said even specifically that she would pass new public records laws that would make it easier to access public records. Keep that in mind as we get to the end of the segment. So in July of 2017, the legislature passed the first public records reforms since the early 1970s, and that was cool, and it created this public records advocate position. This person was ultimately appointed by the governor and served on a board that was supposed to draft public records reforms, things that would make it easier for the public to access our records. Now, despite Governor Brown's promises of transparency and doing things differently than her predecessor, in 2018, multiple stories came out about her hiding public records suppression, and inappropriate spending of government funds. It was later revealed that the governor during the same year of 2018 was also putting pressure on the public records advocate to suppress reforms that were being proposed by the Public Records Advisory Council that would have made access to public records easier and more transparent, though this wasn't really known by the public at the time. But then, to most people's surprise, in September 2019, the Public Records Advocate resigned and put out an open letter to the public about why she had resigned. Her name was Ginger McCall, and she cited as her primary reason for resigning as inappropriate pressure from the governor's office.
When I came here, the understanding that I had was that this was an independent office, which is the understanding that the public has and that the legislature had. Unfortunately, in a series of meetings that I had with the staff of the governor's office, I was informed that in fact they were my supervisors, that it was my job to represent the governor's interests on the Public Records Advisory Council, but I was told that I wasn't supposed to tell anyone. It felt like it was an affront to the transparency mission of the office, and it also made me feel like I was put in an unethical position to represent someone's interests and then not to disclose it to the council or to the public that that's what I'm doing. That I could not abide.
And like all the other scandals that I've talked about in this video so far, this one has a second layer where there is an attempted cover-up that is also exposed. Because this half-hearted cover-up was attempted and exposed within the same day, I think a lot of the public doesn't consider it as a real cover-up, but the media sure does, and I think it's worth mentioning here. The only accountability that I know of that came from this scandal was when the governor withdrew their nomination of one of her staff members from being a judge on the Oregon Court of Appeals, which is the second highest court in the state. This was because the staff member was implicated in the scandal and because the governor kind of made them a scapegoat. Thank you for watching part 1 of this 3-part series. In part 2 I will cover smaller, less well-known scandals where Democratic elected officials interfered with citizens' ballot initiatives. In part 3 I'm going to talk about the lawsuit in detail, and that means talking about the internal structure of the Democratic Party of Oregon.